Hello, Aries. This energy feels heavy already, but not in the way you might think. Somebody here is finally realizing what life feels like without you in it. And wow, I don't think they expected your silence to affect them this much. This person kept telling themselves they had more time to figure things out, more time to reach out, more time to explain. But something has changed. They're looking at you now and realizing you're not standing in the same place anymore. You're stronger, more protected, more focused on yourself. And the question they're struggling with is this: what happens when the person you thought would always be there finally starts moving forward? What happens when you realize the love, patience, and understanding you took for granted are no longer being offered so freely? Somebody is carrying a lot of regret. They're replaying old conversations, old decisions, and all the moments they should have been honest with you. Because deep down, they know they hurt someone who genuinely cared, and now they're wondering if they waited too long to make things right. Okay, Aries, let's see what these cards want to reveal. The first card that catches my attention is the Five of Cups. And this feels heavier than this person wants anyone to know, because what I'm picking up isn't just sadness, it's realization. It's that uncomfortable moment when somebody looks behind them and understands that something valuable has already slipped through their fingers. And the strange thing is, I don't think this person expected to feel this way. For a long time, they convinced themselves that things would stay exactly as they were, that you would still be there, that if they ever wanted another conversation, another chance, another opportunity to explain themselves, somehow it would still be available. But Aries, something has changed. You know, when I look at this energy, it feels like they're searching for the version of you they used to know. The version that always cared. The version that always tried. The version that was willing to understand even when they didn't make things easy. And they're not finding that version anymore. Not because you've become cold. Not because you've become bitter, but because you've started choosing yourself. Wow, that realization is hitting this person much harder than they expected. The Four of Swords is sitting here, and I keep feeling this image of somebody lying awake with their own thoughts. Not reaching out, not saying anything, just thinking. Thinking about conversations they never had, thinking about words they should have said, thinking about moments they assumed would always be there. There is a lot of silence surrounding this person. But it doesn't feel peaceful. It feels loud. The kind of silence that forces someone to finally hear their own truth. And what they're hearing right now is that life keeps moving. You keep moving. And they are no longer certain that they can simply walk back into your world whenever they feel ready. That's where the fear starts showing up. Not dramatic fear, not panic. Something deeper than that. The fear of realizing that another person has finally stopped waiting. Because I don't feel like Aries is chasing this connection anymore. I don't feel desperation. I don't feel attachment. I feel someone rebuilding themselves, growing stronger, becoming more grounded, more focused, more protective of their energy. And that's exactly what is making this person nervous. The Page of Swords keeps pulling my attention. This energy feels like someone who is still watching from a distance, still paying attention, still noticing things. Maybe it's through social media. Maybe it's through mutual friends. Maybe it's simply through intuition. But somehow they know you're changing. They see it. They feel it. They notice the difference in the way you carry yourself now, and every new version of Aries they witness creates another question inside them. What if I waited too long? Because the stronger you become, the less they recognize the version of you that once made space for their confusion. The stronger you become, the more they realize that your life does not revolve around them anymore, and honestly, that realization is humbling them. The energy shifts again when the Emperor appears. Wow, this card feels powerful. Not because of them, because of you. This person is looking at Aries and seeing someone who has stepped into a completely different level of self-respect. Someone who isn't waiting for permission. Someone who isn't asking to be chosen. Someone who isn't chasing validation anymore. And I think that's what they underestimated. They thought your love meant you would always stay. They thought your patience meant you would always understand. They thought your loyalty meant you would always leave the door unlocked. But now they're looking at you and realizing that strength and love can exist together. That someone can care deeply and still walk away from situations that no longer honor them. You know, I keep hearing this energy say, I didn't think they would actually leave. And that sentence alone carries so much emotion. Because it feels like they're finally understanding the difference between having access to someone's heart and appreciating it. This person is beginning to see that those are not the same thing. And the more they reflect on that truth, the harder it becomes to ignore what they're feeling. Because underneath all of this silence, underneath all of this distance, There is someone who is starting to realize that losing Aries was never the possibility they thought it was. It's becoming something that feels very real. And for the first time, they're allowing themselves to sit with that reality. Because once somebody starts sitting with that reality long enough, something else begins to surface. And wow, this feels uncomfortable for them. The Justice card is sitting right in front of me, and the energy around it feels less like punishment and more like honesty. The kind of honesty that shows up when there is nobody left to blame, nobody left to point fingers at, nobody left to hide behind. This person has been spending a lot of time revisiting old memories, old conversations, old choices. And the more they look back, the harder it becomes to ignore certain truths. You know, sometimes people convince themselves that they made the right decision simply because admitting otherwise would hurt too much. That's what this feels like. For a while, they protected their version of the story, the version where their actions made sense, the version where their distance was justified, the version where Aries somehow deserved less than what they were willing to give. But that story isn't holding together anymore. The Seven of Swords appears, and immediately I feel this tension. Not because somebody is actively hiding something now, because they're remembering all the ways they weren't fully honest before. The things they avoided saying, the conversations they kept postponing, the emotions they disguised behind logic, the fears they buried underneath pride. I keep feeling like this person spent a very long time trying to outsmart their own heart, trying to convince themselves they didn't care as much as they actually did, trying to act unaffected, trying to appear detached. But eventually the truth catches up, and that's exactly where they seem to be. The moon is here now, and what fascinates me about this energy is how much of it revolves around misunderstanding. Not just misunderstanding you, misunderstanding themselves. Because I don't think they fully understood what this connection meant to them while they were inside of it. I think they were too distracted, too defensive, too focused on protecting themselves from possibilities that never even happened. So they projected fears onto situations, assumptions onto conversations, doubts onto intentions. And somewhere along the way, they started responding to the story they created in their mind, instead of the person standing in front of them. Wow, that realization hurts. Because the more clearly they see things now, the more they recognize moments where Aries was actually trying to meet them halfway. Moments where Aries was patient. Moments where Aries was understanding. Moments where Aries was simply asking for honesty. And instead of appreciating that, they questioned it. They analyzed it. They searched for problems that weren't really there. I keep hearing this energy say, what if I got it wrong? Not about one small decision, about the entire situation, about the way they viewed you, about the way they interpreted your intentions, about the conclusions they reached when they didn't have all the facts. And for somebody who once felt so certain, that's a difficult place to be, because certainty feels safe. But self-reflection rarely does. The Judgment card enters the reading, and suddenly this energy becomes impossible to ignore. Something is waking up inside them. That's because somebody forced them to see it. Not because Aries demanded an explanation. Not because anybody is pressuring them. It's happening because their own conscience keeps bringing them back here. Back to the things they left unresolved. Back to the words they never said. Back to the truth they spent so much time avoiding. Okay, this person is beginning to understand that some of their biggest mistakes weren't the actions they took. It was the assumptions they believed, the walls they built, the distance they created. And the longer they sit with those realizations, the more difficult it becomes to pretend none of it matters. Because beneath all of this reflection, there is somebody who is quietly confronting the possibility that they judged Aries through the lens of their fears instead of through the reality of who Aries truly was. And that awareness seems to be opening a door inside them that has remained closed for a very long time. And maybe that's why this energy suddenly feels so much more emotional. Because once somebody stops defending their choices, they're left alone with their feelings. And I don't think this person expected those feelings to still be this strong. The Ace of Cups is here. And the moment I touched this card, I felt something soften. Not around Aries, around them. Because for so long, this person was trying to manage what they felt, control it, minimize it, rationalize it. Tell themselves they were fine. Tell themselves they had moved on. Tell themselves they didn't need this connection as much as they thought. But their heart never really agreed with that story. You know, some feelings don't disappear simply because they're ignored. Sometimes they wait. Sometimes they stay quiet. Sometimes they sit beneath the surface for much longer than we expect, and that's exactly what this feels like. I don't feel somebody falling in love. I feel somebody realizing they never completely stopped. Wow, that is a very different experience. Because now, every memory carries a different weight. Every moment they once dismissed suddenly feels important. Every conversation they barely thought about before now keeps replaying itself in their mind. And that brings me to the Lovers. The energy around this card feels deeply personal. Not dramatic, not chaotic, personal. Like this person keeps comparing every emotional experience they've had since then to what they felt when Aries was in their life. And nothing quite measures up. Nothing quite feels the same. Maybe they meet new people. Maybe they keep themselves busy. Maybe they focus on work or responsibilities. But somehow Aries keeps finding a way back into their thoughts. Not because they're trying to force it, because certain connections leave an imprint. And this person is finally admitting that to themselves. The Six of Cups appears, and immediately I feel nostalgia filling the room. Not the kind that comes from loneliness, the kind that comes from remembering something genuine. I keep seeing small moments, tiny details. The way Aries laughed at something completely unexpected. The way Aries understood things they never had to explain. The way conversations felt easier than they do with most people. The way Aries could challenge them without making them feel attacked. The way Aries brought out parts of them that rarely surfaced around anyone else. The strange thing is that they're not remembering grand gestures, they're remembering ordinary moments. And honestly, those are usually the hardest memories to escape. Because ordinary moments become part of everyday life. And when somebody is gone, you notice their absence in all the places they used to exist. A song, a location, a random thought, a familiar phrase. Something small happens, and suddenly Aries is on their mind again. I keep hearing this energy say, I didn't know those moments would mean this much later. And there's sadness in that realization. Not because those memories are bad, because they now understand how valuable they were. The Nine of Swords arrives, and everything becomes heavier again. Because this person isn't only remembering what they had, they're thinking about what they lost. They're thinking about opportunities they let pass, words they never spoke, conversations they avoided. The moments when their pride was louder than their feelings. And wow, that regret feels very real. I don't get the sense that this person is sleeping peacefully these days. There is too much reflection happening, too many unanswered questions, too many scenarios running through their mind. What if I had been honest? What if I had stayed? What if I had listened instead of assuming? Those questions seem to follow them into quiet moments, the moments when distractions disappear, the moments when nobody else is around. And what makes this even more emotional is that they're no longer trying to convince themselves they don't care. That battle seems over. The truth has already settled in. The feelings are already there. The memories are already there. The love is already there. What they're struggling with now is learning how to live with everything they finally understand. Because the more clearly they see what Aries meant to them, the more difficult it becomes to ignore the empty space those feelings still occupy inside their heart. And maybe that's why the energy feels different now. Not lighter, not easier, just more honest. Because once somebody fully accepts what they feel, they eventually have to confront what they did with those feelings. And that's where things start becoming emotional in a completely different way. The King of Cups is here, and what I'm noticing is how much this person has been holding inside. There are so many things they never said. So many moments where they felt something deeply, but chose silence instead. Maybe they thought they were protecting themselves. Maybe they thought keeping control was the safer option. Maybe they believed that if they never fully revealed their heart, they could never be hurt. But all those choices seem much harder to justify now, because they're no longer looking at the situation through fear. They're looking at it through reflection. And reflection has a way of exposing things we've spent a long time avoiding. Wow! I keep hearing this energy say, I should have told Aries what was really happening. Not because they expect sympathy. Not because they want to erase the past. Because they're exhausted from carrying the weight of everything that remained unspoken. The Temperance card enters the reading, and suddenly, I feel someone trying to make peace with themselves. Trying to understand their own actions. Trying to figure out why they reacted the way they did. Why they pulled away when they cared. Why they became distant when they wanted closeness. Why they created confusion when what they truly wanted was connection. You know, a lot of people assume regret only comes from losing someone. But sometimes regret comes from realizing you weren't the version of yourself that you wanted to be. And that's exactly what this feels like. This person is looking back and recognizing moments where they acted from insecurity instead of maturity. Moments where they allowed pride to make decisions that their heart didn't agree with. Moments where they chose avoidance because facing the truth felt too uncomfortable. And the difficult part is that they can see it clearly now. The Eight of Cups appears, and immediately I feel a story that Aries may never have fully known. Because I don't think this person simply walked away emotionally. I think they were walking away from parts of themselves they didn't know how to deal with. Old fears, old wounds, old beliefs, things that had nothing to do with Aries and yet somehow affected the connection anyway. I keep getting the feeling that they wish they could sit down with you and explain everything, not to justify it, not to excuse it, just to help you understand. Because from their perspective, there were battles happening inside them that never made it into words. There were moments when they felt overwhelmed by emotions they couldn't process. Moments when they convinced themselves distance was easier than vulnerability. Moments when they thought silence would somehow solve what honesty required them to face. And now they see how confusing that must have felt from your side, how painful it may have been, how unfair it may have seemed. The Five of Cups returns, and wow, this card feels even heavier here than it did before. Because the sadness isn't only about losing something important. It's about understanding their role in that loss. It's about recognizing the opportunities they had to choose differently, the conversations they could have had, the truth they could have shared, the apologies they could have offered sooner. I keep hearing this person replaying certain memories and thinking, if I had just been honest, if I had just said what I was feeling, if I had just stopped pretending everything was fine. There is a lot of compassion in this energy, but there's also accountability, and those two things seem to be existing together for the first time. Okay, this person doesn't seem interested in hiding behind excuses anymore. They're beginning to understand that Aries deserved more clarity than they received, more honesty than they offered, more emotional courage than they were capable of giving at the time. And the deeper they go into that realization, the more it feels like something inside them wants to speak, wants to explain, wants to acknowledge the parts of the story that were never shared. Because there are still words sitting heavily on their heart, words that have remained there for far longer than they expected. And maybe that's exactly why the energy starts shifting here. Because there comes a point where reflection is no longer enough. A point where somebody realizes they can't keep living inside their thoughts forever. The Two of Wands is here. And this feels like someone standing at a crossroads they've been avoiding for a very long time. Not because they don't know what they feel. I think we've already seen that. Not because they don't understand what Aries means to them. They understand that now too. The struggle seems to be something else. It's the gap between feeling something and doing something about it. And wow, that gap feels enormous to this person. Because once they take action, everything becomes real. The vulnerability becomes real. The possibility of rejection becomes real. The possibility of hearing things they may not want to hear becomes real. Yet despite all of those fears, I don't feel them turning away from the situation anymore. I feel them looking directly at it. Maybe for the first time. You know, there is a difference between missing someone and deciding to do something about it. A lot of people stay in the first category. They think, they remember, they regret, but they never move. This energy feels different because I keep sensing someone who is quietly preparing themselves, rehearsing conversations in their head, imagining how they would explain things, wondering what they would say if Aries gave them a chance to speak honestly. The Knight of Cups appears, and immediately I feel emotion rising to the surface. Not dramatic emotion, not impulsive emotion, something softer, something more sincere. This person seems tired of hiding behind walls, tired of pretending they don't care, tired of acting unaffected when their heart is clearly involved. I keep hearing this sentence. I just want them to know the truth. Not the polished version, not the version designed to make them look good. The truth, the messy parts, the uncomfortable parts, the things they were afraid to admit before. Because there is something very human about this energy. They understand that explanations may not change the past. They understand that words cannot erase hurt, but they still feel compelled to speak, and that desire keeps growing stronger. The Eight of Wands arrives, and suddenly everything feels faster. For so long, this energy moved slowly, almost painfully slowly, thought after thought, memory after memory, reflection after reflection. But now I feel momentum building, like someone who has spent months standing still finally realizing they cannot remain frozen forever. Wow. It's almost like the silence itself has become exhausting. The distance has become exhausting. The wondering has become exhausting. This person seems increasingly aware that every day they remain silent is another day spent carrying the same unanswered emotions. And what fascinates me is that I don't feel them planning some perfect speech. I don't feel them trying to create a flawless outcome. I feel someone reaching a point where honesty matters more than control, where speaking matters more than staying hidden, where authenticity matters more than maintaining an image. The Strength card enters the reading, and this energy becomes surprisingly emotional, because courage is often misunderstood. People think courage means being fearless. But what I'm feeling here is somebody who is very aware of their fears, very aware of their mistakes, very aware of everything that could go wrong, and still feeling pulled toward honesty anyway. Okay, that takes a different kind of strength, not the strength of winning, not the strength of being right, the strength of being vulnerable, the strength of admitting fault, the strength of standing in front of someone and saying, "This is what I should have told you. This is what I should have done differently. This is what I've finally come to understand." And Aries, the energy feels less focused on changing your mind and more focused on finally removing the mask they've been wearing. Because hiding has become heavier than truth. Avoidance has become heavier than accountability. And the more they sit with that realization, the more it feels like a decision is quietly forming inside them. A decision that has less to do with fear and more to do with finally speaking from a place they've spent far too long trying to protect. And maybe that's what makes this final energy feel so different from everything that came before. Because this is no longer just about regret. It's no longer just about memories. It's no longer just about understanding what they lost. Something deeper is happening here. The Ace of Cups returns, and the moment I see it, I get the feeling that this person's heart is no longer hiding from itself. For so long, they seemed caught between what they felt and what they allowed themselves to admit. But that distance is disappearing. And what remains is surprisingly simple. They care. They still care. Maybe more than they ever allowed themselves to acknowledge before. What strikes me most is that this energy doesn't feel focused on the past anymore. Yes, the past matters. Yes, the regrets matter. But their attention seems to be moving towards something else. Possibility. Not certainty. Not expectation. Just possibility. Because when somebody finally understands the value of a connection, they naturally begin wondering what could happen if honesty had a chance to exist where confusion once lived. The star appears, and wow, there is so much vulnerability surrounding this card. I don't feel somebody trying to impress Aries. I don't feel somebody trying to create some grand performance. I feel somebody wishing they could be seen exactly as they are, flaws and all, mistakes and all, truth and all, because one thing keeps coming through very strongly. This person is tired of pretending, tired of acting stronger than they feel, tired of carrying emotions they never fully expressed. Sometimes people spend years trying to protect themselves from disappointment, only to discover that all those defenses also prevented them from experiencing the connection they wanted most. And I think that's something this person understands now. There is a humility here that wasn't present before. A willingness to be real. A willingness to stop controlling every outcome. A willingness to simply show up honestly. The Ten of Cups enters the reading, and immediately I feel this person imagining things they once refused to imagine. Not specific events, not guarantees, just moments. Sharing life with someone who understands them. Having conversations that feel safe. Feeling emotionally connected instead of emotionally guarded. Building something meaningful instead of constantly questioning it. And every time Aries appears in those thoughts, the feeling becomes stronger. Because what they're seeing now isn't only who Aries was. They're seeing who Aries has become. The strength, the growth, the self-respect. The way Aries continued moving forward despite everything. And strangely enough, that seems to make their feelings even deeper, because admiration has started mixing with love. Respect has started mixing with affection, and those emotions seem difficult for them to ignore. The sun appears, and this energy feels warm in a way I haven't felt throughout the rest of the reading. Not because all the problems disappear, not because everything suddenly becomes easy, because clarity has finally arrived. Okay, this person knows what they feel. They know what Aries means to them. They know what they wish they had done differently. And they know they don't want to keep carrying those truths in silence forever. I keep hearing this energy say, if I ever get the chance, I want to show up differently. Not perfect, not flawless, differently. More honest, more open, more emotionally available. More willing to say the things that once remained trapped inside their heart. And honestly, that's what feels most important here. Because this person isn't only thinking about receiving forgiveness. They're thinking about becoming someone capable of giving the honesty they should have offered from the beginning. Wow. There is something incredibly human about that. The desire to go back and handle things better. The desire to speak from the heart instead of fear. The desire to stop hiding behind pride and finally allow somebody to see who you truly are. And as I sit with this energy, it feels like this entire journey has brought them to one simple realization. Losing Aries forced them to understand things they never fully understood before. About love, about themselves, about what truly matters when all the distractions fall away. And those realizations seem to be leading them toward a truth they can no longer ignore, a truth that has been quietly growing stronger every time Aries crosses their mind. And maybe that's the biggest message coming through this reading. Sometimes people don't fully understand what they have until life becomes quiet enough for them to hear their own heart. Whether this person chooses to speak their truth or continues sitting with these feelings a little longer, what matters most is that something inside them has changed. The things they once ignored are impossible to ignore now. The feelings they once avoided are asking to be acknowledged, and the version of Aries they thought would always be there is longer standing in the same place. Thank you so much for spending this time with me today. I truly appreciate every single one of you. If this reading resonated with your situation, take what connects with your heart and simply leave the rest. Be gentle with yourself. Keep choosing your peace, keep choosing your growth, and keep remembering your own value, even when others are only beginning to recognize it. Until next time, take good care of yourselves. Okay, bye for now.